If I were to ask you what the promised land was, most biblically based people would think back to Israel in Egypt. And they would think, yeah, they were in slavery, they were having a horrible time, really oppressed, and God had promised them this land that they would one day flee to. And they were looking forward to it. They were crying out for his help and to be brought into this promised land. They wanted a homeland that was all their own, and it was something God had promised they'd have where they could worship him in peace and actually dwell with him. They were excited for that. And especially under their current oppression state, they were really, really excited for that and crying out even harder for it. And that's all true. That is what the promised land is. But we forget that this promised land was not just something promised to Israel while they were in Egypt. It was something that was promised all the way back to Abraham. And it was actually not just promised to him, but shown to him. It wasn't just some nebulous place that Israel would one day get to after they left Egypt. It was a place he had already brought them to, taken them from, and then would bring them back to someday when they were ready. And we have proof of this. We don't think about it, but there's biblical proof in the book of Genesis and Exodus as well. But in Genesis 12, verse 1, we're going to go through all the patriarchs one at a time, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, just to show that it was a long time that Israel, before they were Israel in Egypt, was actually in the promised land. It says in verse 1 of chapter 12, "Now the Lord said to Abram," which is Abraham before he made covenant with God and became Abraham, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing." Remember that. Not just going to bless Abraham, blessing him so that he will be a blessing. "I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran, and Abraham took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they had come to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh, and at that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. Now Shechem is smack dab in the land of Israel. No matter if you want to look at biblical Israel or modern Israel, Shechem is right there. So Abram is very clearly in the land, building an altar and worshiping God, speaking with him. It also says he journeyed all the way down into Negeb and then into Egypt as well. But he passed through from north to south all the way through the land of Israel. Then in Genesis 24, let's go there to look at Isaac to see if this story continues. Genesis 24, verse 1. Now Abraham was old. Now this is after Abraham had made the covenant with God in Genesis 15. He was old, he was well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had, "Put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughter of the Canaanites among whom I dwell, but will go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac." Then the servant said to him, "Perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me to this land. Must I then take your son back to the land from which you came?" And Abraham said to him, "See to it that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, and who spoke to me and swore to me, 'To your offspring I will give this land.' He will send an angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there." So, not only is Abraham and Isaac still in this promised land, but the idea of even going back to the land where they were from, living there, the idea of that was unthinkable to Abraham. He knew this promise that him and his offspring would inherit this land of Israel. So Isaac is still very much there, and Abraham is still very much aware of this promise to the point where it's dictating his actions. Then in let's go to Genesis 46 and look at Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, this is the last in line before we get to Israel in Egypt. In Genesis 46, verse 1, this is just before Jacob is about to go into the land of Egypt, and he's a little bit concerned because he knows the promise, right? It's been passed down from Abraham's time. This is his family heirloom. This is what's going to be inherited by him and his children. This is a promise from God. And now he's being told to leave into Egypt. This doesn't seem right. And so he's a little bit hesitant. And so what does he do? Just before leaving this land, this promised land, it says, so Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Now, Beersheba is the farthest south you could get in biblical Israel. From Dan to Beersheba meant from all the way to the north, all the way to the south. And so this is like Jacob's last foothold in the land of promise. And just before he leaves, he wants to make sure and check in with God, make sure it's okay. And in verse 2 it says, and God spoke to Israel in visions, Israel being another name for Jacob after he had made covenant with God. Then he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. Then Jacob set out from Beersheba. The sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, their little ones, and their wives in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They also took their livestock and their goods, which they had gained in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt, Jacob and all his offspring with him, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters, and all his offspring he brought with him into Egypt. So this is the last time before Egypt actually entered the promised land before Israel entered the promised land after Egypt, that they were in this land. And we forget about it. We almost pick up this promised land story as if it happens after the children of Israel are in Egypt. But it's way, way before this. They just were not ready to take possession of it yet. And sometimes it feels this way with us and God because he promises us certain things, right? He promises to be with us, to take care of us, to protect us. And these are all promises of God. Like they should be sure, tried and true. And it's like sometimes we feel like we have them, but we don't quite have them. And I want to remind you, though, that Israel entered the promised land after Egypt and took possession of it, a place where they could finally dwell with God. The promise is finally becoming fulfilled, right? And yet in the book of Exodus, when God dwells in the camp of Israel, the first time he appears, nobody can enter the tent. And so there's this promise that even at its most complete, they're about to see the fulfillment of this promise. It's still not quite there. Why? Why was this promise, even at its most fulfilled, still not all the way fulfilled? To find this answer, we have to look in Hebrews chapter 11. This is one of my favorite verses in all of Scripture. Hebrews chapter 11, we go through the hall of faith of all these people. So just list name after name and attribute after attribute and amazing act after amazing act. And after all this, it says, I can't even tell you of all the people who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead back to life by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with a sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. These are the forefathers. These are the people in the Bible that you read about and think, wow, what a faithful life. These are the best of the best people that have followed God and lived and died in faith. And it says this about them in verse 39, and all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. Apart from us, they didn't receive the promise because the promise was also to us to receive as well. God's promises are going to be fulfilled. Partial fulfillment is not good enough. It's not even fulfillment because the word fulfillment means fulfillment. filled, fully filled. And since his promises are to all who have lived and who will ever live, who choose to give their lives to him, we've got to be patient. And we've got to be grateful that in the meantime, he does give us tastes of that promise, both to satiate a desire and to keep us hungry for what's next.